The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Bragg as Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the narrow corridor of Barracks Building 47. At 62, she had been working as a civilian custodian on the base for nearly 15 years, invisible to most who passed by. Her weathered hands gripped the worn handle of her industrial broom, the same one she'd used for the past 3 years. To the soldiers rushing past her in their ACUs, she was just another fixture of their daily routine, the quiet woman who kept their living spaces clean. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But Maria Santos was far more than just a custodian. Beneath her humble exterior lay a story of extraordinary courage that would soon transform how everyone on that base saw her, forever. What the soldiers didn't know was that Maria carried with her a secret that would shake the very foundations of respect and honor within those walls. Maria had arrived at Fort Bragg in 2009, a quiet woman who spoke with a slight accent and kept to herself. She worked the early morning shift, starting at 0500 hours when most soldiers were still sleeping. She preferred it that way. The solitude, the peaceful corridors, the satisfaction of leaving everything spotless for the day ahead. Her supervisor, Janet Williams, had always praised Maria's work ethic. She was reliable, thorough, and never complained about the demanding schedule or the sometimes messy conditions left behind by young soldiers. The barracks housed members of the 7th Special Forces Group, the Green Berets who specialized in operations throughout Latin America. These elite soldiers were among the military's finest, highly trained, disciplined, and proud of their distinguished service record. They moved through the barracks with purpose and confidence, their green berets worn with the pride that came from earning one of the military's most challenging qualifications. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez had been stationed at Fort Bragg for 2 years and had grown accustomed to seeing Maria during his early morning routines. Sometimes he'd nod politely as she worked, occasionally offering a brief "good morning," but like most of his fellow soldiers, he never really saw her as anything more than part of the background. The Green Berets were focused on their missions, their training, their brotherhood. The civilian support staff, while appreciated, rarely entered their sphere of real attention. But Maria noticed everything. She observed the young soldiers dealing with the stress of deployment preparations, saw them struggle with homesickness during late-night phone calls home, and witnessed their dedication as they prepared for dangerous missions overseas. She had cleaned up after celebration parties when they returned from successful operations, and she had quietly disposed of tear-stained letters when missions went wrong and brothers didn't come home. In her 15 years on base, Maria had developed an almost maternal affection for these young warriors. She would sometimes leave small notes of encouragement in Spanish and English, tucked discreetly where homesick soldiers might find them. When she noticed a soldier looking particularly down, she might leave his favorite candy bar on his bunk, purchased with her own modest wages. These small acts of kindness often went unnoticed or were attributed to fellow soldiers, which was exactly how Maria preferred it. The morning of September 15th started like any other. Maria arrived at 0500 hours sharp, signed in with base security, and collected her supplies from the custodial office. She began her routine in the common areas, mopping floors, emptying cash bins, and restocking paper products in the bathrooms. The building was quiet, except for the occasional sound of an early riser preparing for PT formation. As she worked, Maria hummed softly to herself, old songs her mother had taught her back in El Salvador decades ago. These melodies comforted her and helped pass the time during the long hours of repetitive work. She took pride in her job, understanding that her efforts contributed to maintaining the professional environment these soldiers needed to perform their duties effectively. Around 6:30 a.m., soldiers began stirring more actively. Maria could hear the familiar sounds of military life awakening: boots on floors, lockers opening and closing, the buzz of electric razors, and the quiet conversations of soldiers preparing for another day of training. She timed her work carefully to stay out of their way while ensuring everything was clean and ready. What Maria didn't know was that this particular morning would be different. Unbeknownst to her, several members of the 7th Special Forces Group had been conducting research for a special project, and their investigation had led them to discover something remarkable about the quiet woman who cleaned their barracks every day.
Sergeant First Class David Chen had been working on a presentation about Medal of Honor recipients from recent conflicts when he stumbled across a declassified military document that made him stop everything he was doing. The name that caught his attention was one he recognized, though in a context he never could have imagined. Maria Santos. The same name as their custodian, with matching biographical details that couldn't possibly be coincidental. As Maria continued her morning routine, pushing her cart down the hallway and methodically sweeping each section, she had no idea that her carefully guarded secret was about to be revealed, changing not just her life, but the lives of every soldier in that barracks forever.
Chen immediately called over his team members, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Sergeant Thompson, and Specialist Martinez. Their excitement was palpable as they gathered around Chen's computer screen, reading and rereading the document that would change everything they thought they knew about the woman they passed in the hallways every morning. "Are you absolutely certain this is the same person?" Rodriguez asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The implications of what they were discovering seemed almost too extraordinary to believe. Same full name, same birth date, same place of birth in El Salvador. And look at this, Chen pointed to a section of the document. The photograph from her younger years. It's definitely her. The document revealed that Maria Santos was a former member of the Salvadorian military who had served with extraordinary distinction during her country's civil war in the 1980s. But more than that, she was a decorated war hero who had been awarded the highest military honor her country could bestow, equivalent to the Medal of Honor in the United States military. According to the declassified files, then Lieutenant Maria Santos had led a daring rescue mission in 1987 that saved the lives of 32 civilians, including 15 children, who had been trapped in a village under siege by hostile forces. The mission required her to lead a small unit through enemy territory, establish a defensive perimeter, and coordinate an evacuation under heavy fire. During the 6-hour operation, Santos had been wounded twice, but continued to direct the rescue efforts, personally carrying wounded civilians to safety. The citation accompanying her medal described her actions as displaying extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty in the face of overwhelming enemy forces. She had been promoted to captain and become one of the youngest female officers to receive her nation's highest military decoration. But the documents revealed even more. After the war, Captain Santos had worked with United States military advisors as a liaison officer, helping to establish peace in her region. Her service record showed commendations from American commanders who praised her tactical knowledge, leadership abilities, and unwavering commitment to protecting innocent lives. "This explains so much," whispered Thompson, a seasoned Green Beret who had served multiple deployments. "The way she carries herself, how she notices everything but stays in the background. She's been operating with military bearing this whole time, and we never recognized it." Martinez, whose own family had emigrated from Latin America, felt a particular connection to the discovery. She came here after the war, probably seeking refuge, started over completely, took a job that would keep her close to military life without drawing attention to her past. The team spent the next hour researching further, uncovering additional details about Maria's military service. They learned that after receiving her decoration, she had continued to serve until 1992, when political changes in her country made it necessary for her to leave. She had emigrated to the United States under a special program for foreign military personnel, who had assisted American forces. "We need to tell the others," Rodriguez said. "Every soldier in this unit needs to know who's been walking among us. But we need to do this right," Chen cautioned. "She's obviously kept this private for a reason. We can't just blast this information around without considering how she might feel about it." The soldiers agreed that their approach needed to be respectful and thoughtful. They decided to quietly inform their fellow Green Berets, starting with their unit leadership, and plan an appropriate way to acknowledge her service without embarrassing her or making her uncomfortable. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached his commanding officer, Major Patricia Williams, later that morning. Williams listened with growing amazement as Rodriguez explained their discovery.
You're telling me that Maria Santos, our custodian, is a decorated war hero? Williams asked, reviewing the documents they had printed. Yes, ma'am. She's earned the highest military honor her country gives for actions that would qualify for our Medal of Honor if she had been serving with U.S. forces. Major Williams was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what she was hearing. This woman has been cleaning our barracks for 15 years, and none of us knew we were in the presence of a true war hero. That's correct, ma'am. We believe she's intentionally kept her background private, probably for personal reasons related to her immigration and starting a new life here. Williams nodded thoughtfully. We need to handle this with the utmost respect and dignity. Let me think about the appropriate way to acknowledge her service without violating her privacy or making her uncomfortable. Throughout that day, word spread quietly among the Green Berets in the unit. Each soldier who learned about Maria's background had the same reaction: shock, followed by deep respect, followed by a sense of shame that they had failed to recognize the warrior among them. Sergeant Thompson found himself remembering all the times he had barely acknowledged Maria's presence, treating her as invisible background rather than recognizing her as a fellow soldier. She's been maintaining her military bearing all these years, he told his teammates. The way she keeps to her schedule, her attention to detail, her quiet professionalism, it's all there. We just weren't looking with the right eyes. The soldiers began to understand that Maria's choice to work in their barracks wasn't random. She had chosen to remain connected to military life, to serve in her own way by supporting the soldiers who reminded her of her former comrades. Her small acts of kindness, the encouraging notes, the candy bars for homesick soldiers, weren't just the gestures of a caring custodian. They were the actions of a veteran taking care of fellow warriors. As the day progressed, anticipation built among the unit members. They knew they needed to find a way to properly acknowledge Maria's service, but they also knew it had to be done in a manner worthy of both her sacrifice and their own military traditions.
Major Williams spent considerable time that evening consulting with her superior officers and researching military protocol for honoring foreign veterans. She learned that the United States military had provisions for recognizing Allied service members who had served with distinction, particularly those who had supported American forces during their service. The next morning, Williams called a special meeting with all available members of the 7th Special Forces Group stationed in the barracks. Word had spread through the unit overnight, and every soldier present understood the significance of what they had discovered. "Gentlemen," Major Williams began, "yesterday, we learned something extraordinary about Maria Santos, the custodian who has been serving in our barracks for 15 years. We've discovered that she is a decorated veteran of the Salvadoran military, holder of her nation's highest military honor for extraordinary heroism in combat." The room was completely silent as Williams continued. "This woman, who has been quietly taking care of us and our living spaces, is herself a war hero who risked her life to save 32 civilians during her country's civil war. She led a rescue mission under fire, was wounded twice, but continued to direct operations until every civilian was safely evacuated." Murmurs of respect and amazement rippled through the assembled soldiers. Williams held up her hand for silence. "What we do next is important. We need to acknowledge her service in a way that honors both her sacrifice and our military traditions. But we also need to respect her privacy and her choice to keep her background quiet. I'm not going to order how you interact with Maria, but I am going to suggest that she deserves the respect we would show any decorated veteran." Sergeant First Class Chen raised his hand. "Ma'am, request permission to organize a proper acknowledgement of her service, something that shows our respect without putting her on the spot or making her uncomfortable." "What did you have in mind, Sergeant?" "A simple gesture, ma'am. Military courtesy. When she passes through our area tomorrow morning, we stand at attention. No speeches, no big ceremony. Just the respect that one warrior shows another." Williams considered the proposal carefully. "That's appropriate, Sergeant. Respectful, but not overwhelming. Make sure everyone understands. This is about showing respect for her service, not about creating a spectacle."
The plan was communicated throughout the unit. The next morning, 8 Green Berets would be in the common area when Maria made her usual rounds. They would stand at attention as she passed, a simple military gesture of respect for a fellow veteran. That evening, several soldiers found themselves thinking about Maria differently. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez realized that her small acts of kindness took on new meaning when understood as one veteran caring for others. Specialist Martinez thought about the strength it must have taken for her to leave her home country and start over in a foreign land, taking a humble job to stay near the military community that had been her life. Sergeant Thompson couldn't stop thinking about the rescue mission described in the documents. 32 civilians saved, including 15 children, by a young officer who refused to leave anyone behind despite being wounded. It was exactly the kind of heroism that defined the best of military service, and it had been walking among them unrecognized for 15 years. The night passed slowly for many of the soldiers. They were excited about the opportunity to show proper respect to Maria, but also somewhat nervous about how she might react. Would she be pleased that her service had been discovered? Embarrassed? Upset that her privacy had been invaded? Maria, meanwhile, continued her evening routine at home, unaware that her carefully guarded secret had been uncovered. She lived in a small apartment 10 minutes from the base, a modest space filled with a few mementos from her homeland and photographs of the soldiers she had served with decades ago. She rarely spoke of her past, even to her few close friends. Her immigration to the United States had been both a blessing and a source of loneliness. While she was grateful for the safety and opportunities America provided, she missed the camaraderie of military service, the sense of purpose that came from serving something greater than herself. Taking the custodial job at Fort Bragg had been her way of staying connected to that life, of continuing to serve in whatever way she could. As she prepared for sleep that Tuesday evening, Maria felt the familiar mix of pride and melancholy that often came when she thought about her past. She was proud of her service, proud of the lives she had saved, proud of the medal that represented her country's recognition of her sacrifice. But she was also aware that those days were long behind her, that her current role was far removed from the leadership and responsibility she had once carried. She set her alarm for 0430, as she did every workday, planning to arrive at the base at 0500 for another routine day of cleaning and maintenance. She had no way of knowing that the next morning would be anything but routine, that her quiet life of anonymity was about to change forever. The Green Berets, meanwhile, made their final preparations. They reviewed the plan once more, ensuring everyone understood their role in the simple ceremony of respect they had planned. 8 soldiers, representing the finest traditions of the United States military, preparing to honor a sister warrior whose heroism had gone unrecognized for too long. Tomorrow morning would mark the beginning of a new chapter in Maria Santos' story, one where her past service would finally receive the recognition it deserved from those who understood better than anyone the true meaning of courage under fire.
The alarm clock buzzed at 0430 hours. Just as it had every workday for the past 15 years. Maria Santos rose quietly in her small apartment, going through her morning routine with the precision that had never left her since her military days. Coffee first, strong and black, the way she had learned to drink it during those long nights in the field. Then a simple breakfast, a review of the weather, and the drive to Fort Bragg that had become as automatic as breathing. As she drove through the pre-dawn darkness, Maria felt the familiar sense of purpose that came with beginning each workday. She took pride in maintaining the living spaces for the soldiers, understanding better than most the importance of good order and discipline in military life. The barracks needed to be spotless not just for inspections, but because these warriors deserved an environment that reflected the professionalism and excellence they brought to their service. Meanwhile, at the barracks, the 8 Green Berets had arrived early, ostensibly for PT preparation, but actually to position themselves for the moment they had planned. Major Williams had briefed them one final time the evening before. This is about respect. Nothing more, nothing less. You stand at attention when she passes, you maintain military bearing, and you let your actions speak for themselves. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez checked his watch. 0455 hours.
Maria would arrive within minutes, just as she had every day for 15 years. The soldiers positioned themselves naturally in the common area, some pretending to check notices on the bulletin board, others organizing equipment, all of them waiting for the woman who had unknowingly earned their deepest respect. At exactly 0500 hours, they heard the familiar sound of Maria's cartwheels on the linoleum floor. She appeared at the end of the corridor, moving with her characteristic quiet efficiency, broom in hand, as she began her morning cleaning routine. She looked the same as always. Modest work clothes, graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, the slight smile she wore when she hummed her old songs from El Salvador. But to the soldiers watching her approach, everything had changed. They no longer saw just a custodian going about her duties. They saw Captain Maria Santos, veteran of the Salvadoran military, holder of her nation's highest honor for valor, a warrior who had saved 32 lives, including 15 children, a leader who had been wounded twice but refused to abandon her mission. As Maria pushed her cart into the common area, beginning to sweep near the entrance, Sergeant First Class Chen caught the attention of his fellow soldiers with a subtle nod. What happened next would forever change how Maria Santos saw herself and her place in the world. 8 Green Berets, among the most elite soldiers in the United States military, came to attention simultaneously. Their movements were crisp, professional, synchronized, the result of countless hours of military training and discipline. They stood ramrod straight, eyes forward, showing the precise military courtesy reserved for superior officers and distinguished veterans. Maria looked up from her sweeping, startled by the sudden movement. Her eyes widened as she realized what she was seeing. 8 Special Forces soldiers, men she had watched train and deploy and return from dangerous missions around the world, standing at attention for her. The moment stretched, filled with profound meaning that transcended words. Maria's hands tightened on her broom handle as she felt a rush of emotions she thought she had buried decades ago. These soldiers knew. Somehow, they had discovered who she really was, what she had done, the service she had given to her country and her people. Her military training, dormant but never forgotten, caused her to straighten her own posture unconsciously. For just a moment, the humble custodian faded away, and Captain Maria Santos, decorated veteran, stood in that hallway. Her eyes met those of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, and she saw there the recognition that had been missing for 15 years. The acknowledgement of one soldier by another. The soldiers maintained their position for exactly 30 seconds, a traditional military courtesy. Then, as synchronized as their movement to attention had been, they returned to their normal postures. No words were spoken, none were needed. Maria stood motionless for several heartbeats, processing what had just occurred. The weight of recognition, the validation of her service, the respect of these elite warriors, it was overwhelming in the most profound way. She had spent 15 years in anonymity, content to serve quietly, but in that moment, she felt truly seen for the first time since arriving in America. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Slowly, Maria nodded once, a small, dignified acknowledgement of what had just passed between them. Then, with tears beginning to form in her eyes, she continued with her sweeping, but something fundamental had changed. Her movements carried a different quality now, a hint of the military bearing that had once commanded respect on battlefields far from this quiet barracks hallway. The soldiers dispersed to their normal morning routines, but the atmosphere in the barracks had shifted permanently. Word of what had occurred spread quickly through the unit. Soldiers who hadn't been present for the moment of recognition heard about it and understood immediately what it meant. Later that morning, as Maria continued her cleaning duties in other parts of the building, she noticed something different in how the soldiers interacted with her. The polite nods became more respectful. The brief greetings carried more warmth. Several soldiers went out of their way to thank her for her work, and she could see in their eyes that they meant something more than gratitude for clean floors and restocked supplies. For Maria, the morning had awakened feelings and memories she had carefully compartmentalized for years. As she worked, her mind drifted back to that day in 1987 when her life had changed forever. The village of San Miguel del Monte had been under siege for 3 days. Intelligence reports indicated that 32 civilians, including a group of children from the local school, were trapped in the town center with no means of escape. Lieutenant Maria Santos, then 25 years old, had volunteered to lead the rescue mission, despite warnings that it was likely a suicide run. The hostile forces surrounding the village outnumbered her unit 5-1, and they controlled all the high ground approaches. But those children needed help, and Maria had sworn an oath to protect the innocent. She had selected her team carefully, 12 soldiers she trusted with her life, men who understood that some missions were about more than military objectives. They were about basic human decency, about the choice between doing what was safe and doing what was right. Every man on her team had volunteered, knowing the odds of survival were slim. The insertion had gone wrong from the beginning. Their helicopters had been forced to land 3 kilometers from the village due to heavy anti-aircraft fire. As they approached on foot, they walked into an ambush that killed 2 of her soldiers immediately and wounded 3 others, including herself. Shrapnel from a grenade had torn through her left shoulder, but she had pressed forward. What followed was 6 hours of intense urban combat as Maria led her remaining team through the village, building by building, searching for the trapped civilians. They found them huddled in the basement of the school, terrified children and adults who had been without food or water for days, listening to gunfire above their heads. The evacuation required multiple trips through enemy fire. Maria had organized the civilians into groups, prioritizing the children and wounded. She personally carried a 7-year-old girl who had been injured in the initial attack, making 3 separate trips through sniper fire to get everyone to the extraction point. During the final evacuation run, Maria had been hit again, this time a bullet through her left leg that dropped her to one knee. But she could see the extraction helicopters approaching, and 5 more children remained in the basement. She had handed her rifle to one of her sergeants, ordered him to provide cover fire, and crawled back into the building to retrieve the remaining children. The citation for her medal had described her actions as extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming enemy forces. But those clinical words couldn't capture what it felt like to carry those children to safety, to look into their eyes and promise them they would see their families again, to keep that promise despite her own wounds and the chaos surrounding them. All 32 civilians had survived. Of her 12-man team, 3 had been killed and 6 wounded, but they had accomplished the impossible. Maria had spent 2 months in the hospital recovering from her wounds, and when she emerged, she had been promoted to captain and awarded her nation's highest military honor. Now, standing in the American barracks 15 years later, Maria remembered not just the mission, but what came after. The weight of command, the responsibility for her soldiers' lives, the burden of being held up as a hero when she felt like she had simply done what needed to be done, the politics that followed, the civil war that continued to rage, the impossible choices between loyalty to her country and her conscience. Eventually, those choices had forced her to leave everything behind and start over in America. The transition had been jarring, from respected military officer to immigrant struggling with a new language and culture. The custodial job at Fort Bragg had been her way of staying connected to the life she had known, of finding purpose in service, even if that service looked very different than it once had. But this morning, for the first time in 15 years, she had felt truly seen, not as Maria the custodian, but as Captain Santos, the decorated veteran, the woman who had risked everything to save lives. The respect in those soldiers' eyes had awakened something in her that she thought had died when she left El Salvador. As the day progressed, Maria found herself moving differently through the barracks. Her posture was straighter, her movements more purposeful. She caught herself unconsciously falling back into the military bearing that had once been second nature. The other civilian employees noticed the change, though they couldn't quite identify what was different about Maria that day. Janet Williams, Maria's supervisor, pulled her aside during lunch break. "Maria, is everything okay? You seem different today, more confident somehow." Maria smiled, an expression that carried depths of emotion Janet couldn't begin to understand. "Yes, Janet, I think I'm remembering who I used to be." The afternoon brought new interactions with soldiers throughout the barracks. Word of the morning's recognition ceremony had spread beyond the initial unit. Soldiers who had never paid much attention to Maria began acknowledging her presence more respectfully. Some stopped to engage in brief conversations, asking about her background, her family, her experience in America. She didn't discuss her military service directly, but those who knew her story could hear the authority and knowledge in her voice when she spoke about military life. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Throughout the day, Maria Santos was rediscovering herself, remembering the confidence and purpose that had once defined her life. The quiet custodian was revealing the strong, capable leader she had always been underneath. As word of Maria's true identity spread through Fort Bragg, it reached the attention of Colonel James Patterson, the commanding officer of the 7th Special Forces Group. Patterson was a 30-year veteran who had served in multiple combat zones and understood better than most the true meaning of heroism. When Major Williams briefed him on Maria's background, he listened with growing amazement and respect. "You're telling me we've had a foreign Medal of Honor equivalent recipient working in our barracks for 15 years and nobody knew?" Patterson asked, reviewing the declassified documents that had revealed Maria's story. "Yes, sir. She's kept her background completely private. From what we can determine, she immigrated here after the Civil War ended and has been working civilian jobs ever since. She chose to work on base, probably to stay connected to military life." Patterson studied Maria's service record, paying particular attention to the details of her rescue mission. As a Special Forces officer himself, he understood the tactical challenges she had faced and the extraordinary courage required to execute such a mission successfully. "This woman is a warrior, Major. Her actions saved 32 lives, including children. That's exactly the kind of heroism we strive for in Special Forces. She belongs in our Hall of Heroes, not pushing a mop cart." "Sir, she seems to have chosen this life. She's been very private about her past." "Maybe so, but she deserved recognition. Not just from us, but from the entire military community. Her story needs to be told, with her permission, of course." That afternoon, Colonel Patterson made an unprecedented decision. He requested a meeting with Maria Santos, not as her commanding officer, since she was a civilian employee, but as one veteran acknowledging another. The meeting was arranged for the following morning in his office. Maria was nervous as she made her way to the command building. She had never been called to meet with such a high-ranking officer, and she wasn't sure what to expect. When she entered Colonel Patterson's office, she was surprised to see him stand as she approached, a mark of respect typically reserved for distinguished visitors. "Mrs. Santos, please have a seat," Patterson said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "First, let me say that it's an honor to meet you. I've read about your service in El Salvador, and I wanted to personally express my respect for your actions during the San Miguel del Monte rescue mission." Maria felt her cheeks flush. She had spent so many years avoiding recognition, keeping her past private, that being acknowledged at this level felt overwhelming. "Colonel, I don't know what to say. That was a long time ago, in a different life. Mrs. Santos, or should I say Captain Santos, heroism doesn't have an expiration date. What you did in 1987 represents the highest ideals of military service. You saved lives at great personal risk, you led your soldiers with courage and skill, and you accomplished a mission that military analysts still study as an example of successful urban rescue operations." Patterson had done his homework. The rescue mission at San Miguel del Monte had indeed become a case study in military academies, though Maria's name had been classified in most documents for security reasons. "Captain Santos, I'd like to discuss something with you. With your permission, I'd like to arrange for proper recognition of your service, not just within our unit, but at a base level. You deserve to be acknowledged for who you are and what you've accomplished." Maria was quiet for a long moment, processing the colonel's words. She thought about the young woman she had been, the weight of command she had carried, the lives that depended on her decisions. She thought about the 15 years of anonymity that had followed, the safety and peace of being invisible. But she also thought about that morning, about the 8 green berets standing at attention as she passed with her broom. She remembered the feeling of being truly seen, of having her service recognized by warriors who understood its significance. "Colonel, I came to America to start over, to leave the past behind. For 15 years, I've been just Maria the custodian. It was easier that way, safer perhaps." "I understand, Captain, but your story has power. It could inspire young soldiers, show them what true leadership looks like. And more importantly, you deserve to be honored for your sacrifice." Maria considered his words carefully. She had spent so long hiding from her past that the thought of embracing it publicly felt both terrifying and liberating. "If I agreed to this recognition, what would it involve?" "A formal ceremony acknowledging your service, presentation of honors appropriate for a distinguished foreign veteran, perhaps an opportunity to speak with our soldiers about leadership and courage, nothing you're not comfortable with, but enough to ensure your story is properly told."
As Maria thought about the colonel's proposal, she realized that her perspective had already begun to shift. The morning's recognition ceremony had reminded her of the pride she had once taken in her service, the satisfaction that came from knowing she had made a difference in the world. "Colonel, may I have some time to consider this?" "Of course, Captain. Take all the time you need. But please know that whatever you decide, you have the respect and admiration of every soldier on this base who knows your story." As Maria left the colonel's office, she felt the weight of a decision that would determine how she spent the next chapter of her life. For 15 years, she had been content to serve quietly, anonymously, but maybe it was time to step out of the shadows and reclaim the identity she had earned through blood, sacrifice, and unwavering courage. That evening, Maria sat in her small apartment, staring at photographs she hadn't looked at in years. Hidden away in a shoebox under her bed were images from her military service, pictures of her unit, her medal ceremony, the children she had saved during the San Miguel del Monte mission. One photograph showed her in full dress uniform, the medal hanging proudly on her chest, surrounded by the soldiers who had served under her command. She picked up a faded photo of herself with the rescued children, taken a week after the mission when she was still recovering in the hospital. The children had insisted on visiting her, bringing hand-weighed cards and flowers. In the picture, despite her bandaged shoulder and the pain medication that made her eyes heavy, she was smiling, genuinely happy in a way she hadn't felt in years. Maria remembered their names, even after all this time. Little Anna, only 6 years old, who had clung to her during the evacuation. Miguel, the brave 8-year-old who had helped keep the other children calm during those terrifying hours in the basement. Rosa, the teenager who had been wounded but still helped carry the smaller children. They would all be adults now, possibly with families of their own. She wondered what had become of them, whether they remembered the woman who had carried them to safety, whether her sacrifice had allowed them to live full, meaningful lives. The possibility that her story might inspire others, as Colonel Patterson had suggested, began to feel less like a burden and more like an opportunity. The next morning brought a new dynamic to the barracks. Maria arrived at her usual time, but now several soldiers were waiting to greet her respectfully. Word had spread throughout the entire 7th Special Forces Group, and the recognition she received was both overwhelming and deeply moving. Specialist Martinez approached her as she began her morning routine. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for your service. My family came from Guatemala, and I know how difficult it must have been for you during those times." Maria paused in her work, Studying the young soldier's earnest face, she saw something of her younger self in his eyes, the determination to serve, to protect others, to make a difference in the world. Thank you, specialist. Where are you from originally? My parents came from Guatemala City in the 1990s. They've told me stories about the conflicts, about people like you who stood up for what was right when it would have been easier to look away. This conversation, and others like it throughout the day, began to shift Maria's perspective on Colonel Patterson's proposal. She realized that her story wasn't just about the past. It was about the present and future, about showing young soldiers like Martinez that courage came in many forms and from many backgrounds. Later that morning, Janet Williams found Maria during her break. "Maria, I've been hearing things about you today. Soldiers talking about some kind of military service? I had no idea you served in the military." Maria smiled gently at her supervisor, a woman who had been kind to her for years, but had never known the truth about her background. "It was a long time ago, Janet, in my home country." "Well, whatever you did, these soldiers certainly respect you for it. I've never seen them treat any civilian employee the way they're treating you today. You should be proud." Pride. It was an emotion Maria had complicated feelings about. She had been proud of her service, proud of the lives she had saved, proud of the medal she had earned. But she had also seen how pride could become arrogance, how it could blind leaders to the costs of their decisions. She had spent 15 years practicing humility, learning to find satisfaction in simple service. But maybe there was a balance to be found. Pride tempered by wisdom, recognition balanced with continued service. That afternoon, Maria made her decision. She walked to the command building and requested another meeting with Colonel Patterson. "Colonel, I've thought about your proposal," she said as she sat across from his desk. "I would like to accept the recognition, but with conditions." Patterson leaned forward, interested in what she had to say. "I don't want this to be about glorifying war or violence. If my story is to be told, it should emphasize the importance of protecting innocent lives, of serving something greater than ourselves. And I want to continue working here, continue serving these soldiers in whatever way I can." "Absolutely, Captain. We would never ask you to leave your position if you don't want to. And your message about service and protection is exactly what our soldiers need to hear." "Then yes, Colonel, I accept."
The planning for Maria's recognition ceremony began immediately. Colonel Patterson wanted to ensure that the event properly honored her service while respecting her wishes about the message it would convey. He consulted with base leadership, military historians, and protocol experts to design a ceremony that would be both meaningful and appropriate. Major Williams was placed in charge of coordinating the details. She worked closely with Maria to understand her preferences and comfort level with various aspects of the ceremony. They decided on a format that would include a formal presentation of honors, brief remarks from Maria about leadership and service, and an opportunity for soldiers to meet with her personally. Word of the upcoming ceremony spread throughout Fort Bragg and beyond. Military historians who had studied the San Miguel del Monte rescue mission expressed interest in attending. Veterans organizations requested permission to participate. Local media asked for interviews, though Maria declined most publicity requests, preferring to keep the focus on the message rather than personal fame. As the ceremony date approached, Maria found herself experiencing a mix of emotions she hadn't felt in decades. There was nervousness about speaking publicly, excitement about finally sharing her story, and a profound sense of closure about a chapter of her life she had kept hidden for so long. The soldiers in her barracks had become increasingly supportive and protective of her. They understood the significance of what she was about to do, stepping out of anonymity to share her story, and they wanted to ensure she felt supported throughout the process. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez took on the role of unofficial liaison between Maria and the unit. "Ma'am, if you need anything at all, someone to practice your speech with, help with logistics, or just someone to talk to about what you're feeling, any of us would be honored to help. Maria was touched by the offer. These elite soldiers, trained in the most demanding military operations, were offering to support her emotional needs as she prepared to share her story. It reminded her of the bonds she had shared with her own soldiers decades ago. "Thank you, Sergeant. Actually, there is something you could help me with." "Anything, ma'am." "I want to make sure my remarks connect with young soldiers like you. Could you help me understand what messages would be most meaningful to today's military?" Rodriguez was honored to be asked. Over the next several days, he and several other soldiers met with Maria to discuss the challenges facing modern military personnel. The stress of deployments, the difficulty of making life and death decisions, the importance of ethical leadership in complex situations. These conversations helped Maria craft remarks that would bridge the gap between her experiences in the 1980s and the realities facing today's soldiers. She spoke about the universal challenges of leadership, the responsibility that comes with command, and the importance of never forgetting that behind every military decision are human lives that hang in the balance. Meanwhile, preparations for the ceremony continued. The base's honor guard began rehearsing their role in the presentation. A special medal was commissioned. While Maria couldn't receive American military decorations, the base wanted to present her with a token of recognition that acknowledged her service and sacrifice. 3 days before the ceremony, Maria received an unexpected visitor. A middle-aged woman appeared at the barracks asking for Maria Santos. When Maria was called to the front desk, she found herself face to face with a stranger who looked remarkably familiar. "Captain Santos, my name is Ana Patricia Morales. I think you saved my life when I was 6 years old." Maria's hand went to her throat as recognition flooded through her. Little Ana, the frightened child she had carried through sniper fire 37 years ago, now stood before her as a grown woman. "Ana, is it really you?" Tears filled both women's eyes as they embraced in the middle of the barracks lobby. Ana explained that she had seen news of the upcoming ceremony online and had driven from Florida, where she now lived with her family. "Captain, you probably don't remember, but after the rescue you asked me why you came back for us. You told me that it was what good people do. They don't leave others behind. That conversation shaped my entire life. I became a teacher because I wanted to help protect children the way you protected me." Maria was overwhelmed. She had often wondered about the children she had saved, but she had never imagined she would see any of them again, let alone learn how her actions had influenced their lives. "Ana, you were so brave that day. You helped keep the other children calm. I remember thinking that you were going to grow up to be a strong woman. I learned strength from you, Captain, from watching you refuse to give up even when you were wounded. You showed us what courage looked like." Ana's visit provided Maria with exactly the motivation she needed for the ceremony. Here was living proof that her service had mattered, that the risks she had taken and the sacrifice she had made had allowed this woman to live, to raise a family, to serve others as a teacher. It reminded Maria that heroism wasn't about personal glory. It was about the ripple effects of our actions, the lives we touch, and the positive changes we create in the world. The evening before the ceremony, Maria sat in her apartment with Ana, looking through old photographs and sharing memories. Ana had bought pictures of her own family, her husband, her 2 children, her students. Each image represented life that existed because Maria had been willing to risk everything to save a group of trapped civilians. "Captain, tomorrow when you speak to those soldiers, I hope you'll tell them what you told me all those years ago, that good people don't leave others behind. It's a message the world needs to hear."
The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright. Maria woke early, not from her alarm, but from anticipation. For the first time in 15 years, she would publicly acknowledge her military service, share her story, and stepped fully into the light of recognition she had avoided for so long. As she dressed, Maria chose to wear a simple blue dress that she felt appropriate for the occasion. Around her neck, she placed a small gold cross that had belonged to her mother, a reminder of the faith that had sustained her through the darkest moments of combat and the long years of starting over in a new country. At Fort Bragg, preparations had been underway since dawn. The ceremony would take place in the base's main auditorium with representatives from throughout the military community in attendance. The honor guard had practiced their movements until every step was perfect. The lighting had been adjusted to ensure Maria would be clearly visible to everyone present. Colonel Patterson had insisted that the ceremony maintain the dignity appropriate for honoring a decorated veteran. There would be no fanfare or spectacle, just a simple, respectful acknowledgement of extraordinary service. As Maria arrived at the base that morning, she was surprised to see the number of people already gathering. Soldiers from various units, civilian employees, local veterans, and community members had all come to witness this unprecedented recognition ceremony. Anna met Maria at the entrance, having driven over early to provide moral support. "Captain, are you ready for this?" Maria took a deep breath, feeling the same mixture of nerves and determination she had experienced before difficult missions decades ago. "I think so. It feels surreal, but right." Inside the auditorium, nearly 300 people had gathered. The front rows were reserved for the soldiers from Maria's barracks, the Green Berets who had first discovered her identity and shown her the respect that had started this entire journey. Behind them sat soldiers from other units, base leadership, and invited guests. At precisely 1,000 hours, the ceremony began. The honor guard presented the colors, and the assembly rose for the national anthem. As the music played, Maria felt a profound connection to both her adopted country and the nation of her birth. She had served under different flags, but the values she had fought for, protection of the innocent, service to others, courage in the face of adversity, were universal. Colonel Patterson took the podium to begin the ceremony. "Today, we gather to honor an extraordinary individual who has walked among us for 15 years. Captain Maria Santos served with distinction in the Salvadoran military, where she was awarded her nation's highest honor for heroism in combat. Her actions saved 32 civilian lives, including 15 children, during a rescue mission that exemplified the highest traditions of military service." As Patterson continued to describe her service record, Maria felt the weight of memory settling on her shoulders. She thought of her fallen soldiers, the men who had given their lives during the rescue mission. She thought of the fear in the eyes of the children as she carried them to safety. She thought of the impossible decisions she had made as a young officer, choices that had shaped not just her life, but the lives of everyone she had touched. "Captain Santos," Patterson continued, "after immigrating to the United States, chose to continue serving by working in our military facilities, caring for the soldiers who reminded her of her own comrades. For 15 years, she has demonstrated the same dedication to service that marked her military career, proving that true warriors never stop serving their communities." When Patterson called Maria to the podium, the entire assembly rose in a sustained standing ovation. As Maria walked to the front of the auditorium, she saw faces that had become familiar over the years. Soldiers she had watched grow from recruits to seasoned professionals, civilian colleagues who had worked beside her, and new faces of people who had come simply to honor her service. At the podium, Maria looked out at the assembled crowd and felt a moment of overwhelming emotion. These people had gathered to honor her, but she felt that she was the one who should be honoring them, the soldiers who continued to serve, the families who sacrificed alongside them, the communities that supported military service. "Thank you," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system. 37 years ago, I was a young lieutenant who faced an impossible choice. I could follow safe procedures and leave 32 civilians to die, or I could risk everything to attempt a rescue mission that military doctrine said was likely to fail. The auditorium was completely silent as Maria continued. I chose to attempt the rescue, not because I was particularly brave, but because I knew that those children and adults were someone's mothers, fathers, daughters, sons. They deserved the same protection I would want for my own family. She paused, making eye contact with soldiers throughout the audience. The lesson I learned that day, and the message I want to share with you today, is that true leadership isn't about following the safe path. It's about making the hard choices, accepting responsibility for the consequences, and never forgetting that our decisions affect real people with real families who love them. Maria spoke about the universal challenges of military service, the weight of command, the difficulty of making life and death decisions, and the importance of caring for those who serve under your leadership. She emphasized that heroism wasn't about seeking recognition or glory, but about doing what needed to be done when others were counting on you. The soldiers I served with, the children I helped save, the men and women I have watched serve in these barracks for the past 15 years, they have all taught me that service is not about the uniform you wear or the rank on your shoulder. It's about the commitment to protect others, to serve something greater than yourself, and to never leave anyone behind when they need help. As Maria concluded her remarks, she shared the story of Anna's visit, how learning that her actions had shaped a young girl into a woman dedicated to helping others had reminded her why service mattered. Anna asked me to tell you something I told her 37 years ago. Good people don't leave others behind. Whether you're carrying wounded civilians through enemy fire or supporting a fellow soldier through a difficult deployment, the principle remains the same. We take care of each other. The response from the audience was immediate and powerful. Soldiers throughout the auditorium were visibly moved by her words. Many wiped away tears as they reflected on their own service and the responsibility they carried for their fellow warriors. Colonel Patterson returned to the podium to present Maria with several tokens of recognition. First, he presented her with a specially commissioned medal that acknowledged her foreign military service and her continued dedication to supporting American forces. The medal featured an eagle and condor together, symbolizing the partnership between nations in the cause of freedom and protection of innocent life. Colonel Santos, this medal represents our recognition of your extraordinary service and your continued commitment to the men and women who serve in uniform. You have exemplified the warrior ethos in both your military service and your civilian life. Next, he presented her with a flag that had flown over Fort Bragg, officially making her an honorary member of the 7th Special Forces Group, a recognition reserved for civilians who had demonstrated exceptional support for Special Forces operations. Finally, in a surprise that brought tears to Maria's eyes, Colonel Patterson announced that the barracks where Maria had worked for 15 years would be officially renamed the Santos Hall in her honor, ensuring that future generations of soldiers would know the story of the decorated veteran who had served them quietly and humbly for so many years. As the formal portion of the ceremony concluded, something remarkable happened. Led by the 8 Green Berets who had first stood at attention for Maria weeks ago, the entire assembly of soldiers came to attention simultaneously. Nearly 200 military personnel, from the newest privates to senior officers, rendered military honors to Captain Maria Santos. The moment was profound and unprecedented. Here was a foreign veteran, a civilian employee, receiving the kind of recognition typically reserved for the highest-ranking American military leaders. But every soldier present understood that Maria had earned this respect through her actions, her sacrifice, and her unwavering commitment to service. After the formal ceremony, a reception allowed attendees to meet Maria personally. Line after line of soldiers waited patiently to shake her hand, thank her for her service, and share how her story had impacted them. Many spoke about the inspiration they drew from learning that true heroes often served quietly, without seeking recognition or fame. Sergeant First Class Chen, who had first discovered Maria's identity, approached her during the reception. "Ma'am,
I wanted to apologize for invading your privacy by researching your background. Maria smiled warmly. Sergeant, you gave me the greatest gift possible. You helped me remember who I really am. For 15 years, I was hiding from my past. You helped me reclaim it. Young soldiers throughout the reception sought Maria's advice on leadership, service, and handling the challenges of military life. She found herself naturally falling into a mentoring role, sharing wisdom gained from decades of experience in both military and civilian service. As the afternoon wore on, Maria reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 weeks ago, she was an invisible custodian, content to serve quietly in the background. Today, she was an honored veteran whose story would inspire future generations of soldiers. But perhaps the most meaningful part of the day came when Anna approached the podium during the reception's open microphone period. She had asked to share her perspective as one of the children Maria had saved. 37 years ago, Captain Santos carried me through gunfire to safety. But she didn't just save my life that day. She showed me what courage looks like, what service means, and how one person's willingness to sacrifice can change the world. I became a teacher because of her example, and I've tried to pass that lesson on to my students. We all have the power to help others, to serve our communities, and to make choices that matter. She paused, looking directly at Maria. Captain, you told me that day that good people don't leave others behind. Thank you for not leaving us behind, and thank you for not leaving these soldiers behind. You've been taking care of warriors your entire life, and today we finally get to take care of you. The applause that followed was thunderous and sustained. As Maria looked out at the faces of the soldiers, civilians, and community members who had gathered to honor her service, she felt a completeness she hadn't experienced since her military days. She was no longer hiding from her past, she was embracing it and using it to continue serving others. The ceremony concluded with the traditional military dismissal, but many attendees lingered to continue conversations with Maria. As the sun began to set over Fort Bragg, Maria Santos, custodian, veteran, hero, looked forward to returning to work the next morning. She would still push her cleaning cart through the barracks, still sweep the floors and empty the trash bins, but now she would do so as Captain Santos, honored veteran and inspirational leader whose story had reminded an entire military community what true service looked like. Her journey from invisible custodian to celebrated hero was complete, but her service, the real measure of her worth, would continue for as long as she was able to care for the soldiers who had embraced her as one of their own.
6 months after the recognition ceremony, life at Fort Bragg had settled into a new rhythm. Maria Santos still arrived at 0500 hours every morning, still pushed her cleaning cart through the corridors, and still took pride in maintaining the barracks to the highest standards. But everything else had changed in the most profound ways. The morning routine now included something that had become a cherished tradition. As Maria made her rounds through Santos Hall, as the barracks was now officially known, soldiers would greet her not just with polite nods, but with genuine warmth and respect. Young soldiers sought her advice on everything from military protocol to personal problems. Seasoned NCOs discussed leadership challenges with her, drawing on her decades of wisdom. "Good morning, Captain," became the standard greeting she heard throughout her workday. Though she had never held rank in the U.S. military, the title felt natural and appropriate. She had earned the respect that came with it through her actions, her sacrifice, and her continued dedication to service. The physical changes to the barracks were subtle but meaningful. A small plaque near the main entrance told the story of Captain Maria Santos and the rescue mission at San Miguel del Monte. New soldiers arriving at the unit would read about the decorated veteran who worked alongside them, learning that heroism came in many forms, and that true service often continued long after the uniform was hung up. But the most significant changes were personal. Maria had found her voice again, not just as a custodian doing her job, but as a leader sharing her experience with a new generation of warriors. Colonel Patterson had asked her to participate in several leadership seminars where she spoke to junior officers about decision-making under pressure and the responsibility of command. Quote, "Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about making decisions when the stakes are high, taking responsibility for the consequences, and never forgetting that the lives of your soldiers depend on your choices." End quote. These sessions had become some of the most requested leadership training on the base. Maria's ability to connect military theory with real-world experience, combined with her humble demeanor and obvious authenticity, made her an extraordinarily effective teacher. The story of the custodian who was revealed to be a war hero had spread far beyond Fort Bragg. Military publications featured articles about her service. Veterans organizations invited her to speak at their events. A military historian was working on a book about the San Miguel del Monte rescue mission with Maria's cooperation and input. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the ongoing relationship with Anna and the other survivors she had saved. Anna had started a foundation dedicated to supporting the children of veterans, inspired by the conversation she'd had with Maria all those years ago about good people not leaving others behind. 3 other survivors of the rescue mission had made contact after seeing news coverage of the ceremony, each sharing how Maria's actions had shaped their lives. These connections had given Maria a fuller understanding of the ripple effects of her service. She wasn't just a former soldier who had completed a successful mission. She was someone whose actions had created generations of positive impact, allowing children to grow up, raise families, and contribute to their communities. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, now promoted to Sergeant First Class, had become one of Maria's closest friends on the base. He often stopped by during his shifts to check on her and engage in conversations that ranged from military tactics to life philosophy. "Captain," he said one morning as she cleaned the common area, "I wanted you to know that my deployment to Afghanistan next month is going to be different because of what you've taught us." "What do you mean, Sergeant First Class?" "My message about never leaving people behind, about the responsibility of leadership, it's changed how I think about command. When I'm leading soldiers in dangerous situations, I'm going to remember that every decision affects real people with families who love them." These conversations reminded Maria daily that her story continued to have purpose and power. She wasn't just sharing memories of past service, she was actively shaping the character and decision-making of current military leaders. The recognition had also brought unexpected personal fulfillment. For the first time since immigrating to America, Maria had felt fully integrated into her community. She had found a way to honor her past service and her current life, bridging the gap between Captain Santos, the war hero, and Maria, the custodian. Janet Williams, her longtime supervisor, had adapted to Maria's elevated status with grace and understanding. "You know, Maria, I always knew there was something special about you. You carried yourself differently than the other custodians. Now I understand why." "Janet, I'm still the same person. I still want to do my job well, still want to serve these soldiers in whatever way I can. But now you're doing it as your complete self, not hiding part of who you are. That makes all the difference." As Maria reflected on the past months, she realized that her journey had come full circle. She had begun her adult life as a young officer committed to protecting others, had spent years hiding that identity, and had now emerged as a recognized veteran who could use her experience to continue serving. The 8 Green Berets who had first stood at attention for her had become like family. They checked on her regularly, included her in unit social events, and sought her counsel on both professional and personal matters. Staff Sergeant Chen had been selected for promotion to Sergeant First Class, and he credited the leadership lessons he'd learned from Maria with helping him advance his career. But perhaps the most powerful reminder of her impact came during a ceremony where several soldiers from her unit were being deployed overseas. As she watched these young warriors prepare to leave their families and risk their lives in service to their country, Maria felt the same protective instincts that had driven her to volunteer for the rescue mission decades ago. After the ceremony, several of the deploying soldiers approached her privately. Quote, "Captain Santos, will you promise to pray for us while we're gone?" end quote, said Specialist Martinez, who was heading to his first deployment. Of course, Specialist, but more than that, I want you to promise me something in return. Anything, ma'am? Promise me that you'll remember what good people do. Take care of each other over there. Don't leave anyone behind. Come home safely to the people who love you.
The young soldier's eyes filled with tears as he nodded solemnly. I promise, Captain. We all promise. As Maria watched the soldiers board their transportation, she felt the same mixture of pride and concern that had characterized her military service. These young warriors were carrying forward the values she had tried to instill in them: courage, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to protecting others. That evening, as she had done countless times over the past months, Maria sat in her apartment looking at the photographs from her ceremony. But now they were joined by new pictures, images of her with current soldiers, letters from young people inspired by her story, and photographs from Anna's foundation events. At 62 years old, Maria Santos had found a new mission, a new way to serve that drew on all her experience while creating new opportunities to make a difference. She was no longer just the custodian who swept the barracks, nor just the war hero who had saved 32 lives decades ago. She was Captain Maria Santos, veteran, mentor, and a living reminder that true service never ends, that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the most powerful way to lead is by continuing to serve others, one person at a time, one day at a time, with the same dedication and humility that had always defined her character. Every morning when she arrived at Santos Hall, Maria would pause at the plaque that told her story. It served not as a monument to past glory, but as a daily reminder of the responsibility that came with recognition. She had been given a platform to influence young lives, and she intended to use it wisely. The woman who had once swept the barracks in anonymity now walked those same halls as an honored veteran whose story would inspire generations of soldiers to come. Her journey from invisible custodian to celebrated hero proved that sometimes the greatest impact comes not from seeking recognition, but from faithful service that eventually, inevitably, receives the acknowledgement it has always deserved. And every day, as she continued her work caring for the soldiers at Fort Bragg, Captain Maria Santos embodied the truth she had shared with Anna all those years ago. Good people don't leave others behind. They continue serving, continue caring, continue making a difference in whatever way they can for as long as they are able. Her story had come full circle, but her service, the real measure of her worth, continued on. Now, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.